Evening all. My name's McClue, Inspector R.P. McClue. So this is Rutting on the Rise, the famous Paynton Place Hotel. The guidebook says it's a splendid example of Queen Anne architecture. Grim and gloomy, I'd have said, but maybe I'm wrong. Not that I ever have been in the past. I believe you're all here to enjoy a cooking holiday, a weekend mini-bake, as it's called. Let me explain. This was a joint venture by two men, Paul Babylon, who owns this hotel, and the TV chef Francis Franny Craddock. But Mr. Craddock is no longer here to enjoy himself, because he's dead. His body was found at approximately 2:30 this morning. There's some sort of ruined summer house or something. What? Oh, apparently it's called a folly. Anyway, there's this folly in the grounds with a vault underneath. Franny Craddock was found dead in that vault. So the first question is, why was he there in the middle of the night? Our forensics are searching the scene at the moment. Think of them as CSI Norfolk, and we'll have more news later. But right now, the best we can say is that he died from poisoning sometime between 1 and 2:30 this morning. And I think someone here poisoned him, though we haven't yet found out how that poison was administered. Until we do, I'd like you all to stay here, and you might profitably use the time to see if you can discover which one of you is responsible. Oh, and I found a couple of clues that might help you. Don't none of you go anywhere. I'll be back. Thank you. So now we know that the victim, Franny Craddock, had been in a relationship with Teresa Paynton. Maybe there was unfinished business there. Maybe Boris Jefferson had a fit of jealousy. We also know that, apart from being a business partner of Paul Babylon, Mr. Craddock was involved with Barry Chips. He rented premises from him in the next town. Mr. Chips had a finger in many pies. Then there's Judy Drench, who had something bordering on an obsession with Mr. Craddock. That never looks good. And the Reverend Shorthose, well, I don't quite see how he fits into this at the moment, but both Ms. Drench and Reverend Shorthose are hiding something. I'd stake my reputation on it. Anyway, while you've all been talking at each other, I've had some reports back. Franny Craddock was found in a vault under the folly. The folly was left unlocked, but there's no sign of a key on Mr. Craddock's body or inside the vault. We have still not discovered how the poison was administered. That is a crucial question. And we still haven't discovered what part the Paynton plunder plays in all of this, if indeed it plays any part at all. Did Franny Craddock discover something about the plunder, and is that why he was killed? Fizzy Crookshank and Lizzie Lightwater were here in search of the plunder, so this may be relevant to them. Or is this all something of a red haddock? Maybe there is no such thing as the Paynton plunder anyway. Maybe it's all a hoax on the part of the mad baronet, Richard Paynton. But we have learned that the mad baronet brought back a collection of artefacts from his time in India, which are kept in the so-called Cabinet of Curiosities in the so-called Red Room. I've just had a look at this cabinet and there's one item missing. The label says it was something called Jonathan Small's elixir, and that it came originally from the Andaman Islands. Interesting. I've also had the rooms upstairs searched, and we found a few things that might be of interest to you. I'll share them now. Okay, carry on. Yes, I said you people were hiding things. So, Judy Drench turns out to be an undercover cop. Truncheon Judy, as she's known, apparently. It's news to me. But it doesn't mean to say that she's quite in the clear yet on the murder of Franny Craddock. The so-called Reverend Piers Shorthose isn't quite what he seems either. Sammy Shorthose is how we know him, and he's done time for theft. Neither Barry Chips nor Lizzie Lightfingers Lightwater have actually faced charges, but there are enough rumours sloshing around these two to flood half of Norfolk. And if that's not enough, there's some bizarre love triangle going on between Teresa Paynton, Lizzie Lightwater and Franny Craddock. And Boris Jefferson. So not a triangle at all. A love square. Or maybe a love parallelogram or rhombus. Anyway, we also find the Fizzy Crookshank and Lizzie Lightwater admit to having been at the Folly last night but left before Mr. Craddock went out there. How convenient. And how convenient that last night was the one night that the manager's office was accidentally left unlocked so that anyone could get access to the key to the Folly. Almost as though Paul Babylon were creating a smokescreen. Mind you, Mr. Babylon's main concern is clearly money. It looks as though he's bitten off more than he can chew with buying Paynton Place. Being an hotelier isn't the same as being a restaurateur, and he's not dealing with it very well, which is why he's been borrowing money from Boris Jefferson. And meanwhile Barry Chips is hovering like a vulture waiting to buy a Paynton Place at a knockdown price. It's a good job I'm not a judgmental kind of man, because you lot have made a right mess of things. However, we have finally tracked down the means used to kill Franny Craddock. He was indeed poisoned with the Jonathan Small's elixir that the mad baronet brought back from India, and it was administered like this. It turns out that Franny Craddock wore a full set of false teeth, and every night he soaked his dentures in a glass of water, to which he added a product called Dentata Plus. Except that last night someone poisoned his bottle of Dentata Plus with a slug of Jonathan Small's elixir. So when he got up to go out to the Folly, for reasons we still haven't discovered, he put his teeth in, and they poisoned him. I get the feeling that we're near a solution to this one. One last push, eh? So this is where we are. This weekend mini-bakes idea is as useless as it sounded from the start. There weren't enough people booked in to make it profitable for Paul Babylon. But Mr. Babylon doesn't seem to care as much as he might. The company might go bust, but he'll survive. All we can say is that the death of Franny Craddock came at a very opportune moment for some people. Elsewhere, Judy Drench is here on an unofficial undercover investigation. We don't really approve of that round these parts, particularly when it's personal. And this was personal. Her brother died in a fire that destroyed Between a Rock and a Hard Place. Those premises are owned by Barry Chips and were, after the fire, rented out to Franny Craddock. Mr. Craddock's love life was somewhat Byzantine in its complexity, and he seems to have left angry people in his wake. Teresa Paynton, Boris Jefferson, Lizzie Lightwater. Meanwhile, Fizzy Crookshank and the so-called Reverend Shorthose had their own feuds going. Fizzy Crookshank hadn't forgiven Franny Craddock for stealing her research and making money out of it. And Shorthose hadn't forgiven the Paynton family for the treatment of his ancestor. He wanted a share of the Paynton plunder. Yes, the Paynton plunder. I still don't quite see how that fits in. Still, over to you. Who do you think murdered Franny Craddock? Let's try to look at this logically. First thing, did Franny Craddock find out anything about the Paynton plunder? Is that why he was killed? Answer, I have no idea whether he found out anything. I have no idea if there was anything to find out. We still don't seem to have discovered if the plunder even exists. Is it relevant? No, I don't think it is. The real question is much simpler. Who stood to benefit from Franny's murder? The company set up to run these weekend mini-bakes was struggling, but Mr. Craddock's death means that the life insurance policy will pay out. Who wins? And, just as important, who knew that Mr. Craddock wore false teeth? This was clearly a secret. Chefs don't like to advertise their dentures. But one person knew. The person who told us that he knocked out Mr. Craddock's teeth in a rugby match at school. The same person who had invested a large sum of money in the weekend mini-bakes and who stood to lose a packet if it went under. Boris Jefferson, I'm arresting you for the murder of Franny Craddock. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Terms and conditions apply. As for the rest of you, remember that culinary crime is much rarer than you think. So don't eat cheese before bedtime. Don't have nightmares.